Merry Christmas and Happy New Year 2024 to all of you watching from around the globe. The new year is just around the corner, and we in today's video are going to be taking a look at some of the games that I've played against the winners of the recent chessusee and World Chess giveaways. Currently, there are 4 prizes that have not yet been claimed, and I will be redrawing new winners every 24 hours, so be checking your emails to see if you are selected as one of the winners. 24 hours expires, the prize has to unfortunately move on to the next giveaway entrant, so be sure to check to see if you are one of those final 4 prizes that has not yet been claimed. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at some of the games of giveaway winners, of one winner from a past giveaway, and then the remaining 4 will be for the present giveaway. Additionally, one of the players that I ended up playing is apparently the highest rated player that I have as a subscriber to the chessusee channel, and just so happened that he won, and he's a master level player. So we're going to take a look at that game and see what happened in just a few minutes, a little bit later in the video. So if you want to, use the timestamps at the bottom of the video, skip ahead to that game if you'd like. Otherwise, let's get started with the very first giveaway winner from last year. Here we go. In this game, I was playing against a giveaway winner from the last giveaway. This game was played in a little bit late February 2023. At the time, I was rated about 1750, and my opponent was rated a little over 900. So let's go ahead and take a look at this game. It was phenomenal. So it went e4, e5, knight f3, all the knights come out, and I'm playing here as black. We're looking at my opponent's position. Let's flip that around. We'll see from my perspective what I was looking at. So I had the black pieces in this game, and the time control was 15 minutes flat. There was no increment added to this game. So we have the bishop has developed. He develops his bishop and knight to e7. So far, nothing too crazy. We both develop our pawns into the center here, and I'm the first one to attack here in the center. So we have takes, takes, and because this knight on the last move was pinned to the king, the knight couldn't take, and if bishop takes, then just queen recaptures, and this knight is still pinned to the king. So this would have been fine, but instead we have my opponent here breaking the pin and now enabling this knight to then be taken. So I trade off the pieces and create a little bit of a doubled pawn structure here before castling onto the king side. He castles, and then I develop my final minor piece with bishop to g4. This creates a bit of a pin on the queen, however this can be broken. The primary risk here is that if white does end up moving their queen, say to, I don't know, d2, then bishop can take the knight, and then after pawn takes, it leaves this whole file right here entirely vulnerable to a king side attack. In this position, if I were to bring my queen here, that just hangs the queen in one move, and that would not be ideal. But the idea is there that this entire file would be open. So because of this, white's going to leave their queen in defense of the knight and plays h3 here to kick back the bishop. And then bringing the rook here to the center is actually a very nice move. A lot of players who are below the rating of oftentimes even as high as 1200, but it can go down to about 1000, is they will tend to forget to bring their rooks here into the center. And if you're newer to chess and you're looking for a move to play, all of your pieces are developed, your pawns have been moved, and there's nothing that's really pressing in the position, oftentimes it's not a bad idea to just bring both of the rooks to the center of the board. By bringing the rooks to the center of the board, it engages them into the action in the center of the board, and long term this is going to be very helpful, especially leading to the endgames. You'll probably find a use for the rook at that point. The rook will be accessible and will be easy to use. So here we have queen f6. The idea here is to attack this knight again. At any point here, white could play just g4 and kick back my bishop to g6, but instead we have bishop d5. Bishop d5, then rook to e8. Defending the pawn here, we have the knight, we have the queen, we have the rook all defending, and then for white we have the knight is somewhat attacking, but we have to remember it's still pinned, so it's not going to move. And we have the rook that is attacking the pawn here. One thing that the bishop right here did was created an issue right here with the b7 pawn. With this file right here open for the rook, all white needs to do, and what white actually does on the next move, is plays rook to b1. This is creating a lot of pressure here and is leaving me in a position where I'm a little bit uncomfortable. So I play queen to d6, and this wasn't the best move I could have played. The best move, according to the engine here, is to play rook a to d8, targeting the bishop that's not currently defended. And because of danger levels, we have to focus on the fact that the bishop is worth more than the pawn, so bringing the rook here. The bishop needs to be saved first, and white cannot just go ahead and take the pawn straight away. And this is starting to clear up some of my issues here in this position. Additionally, I think rook b8 might not be a terrible move, just defending the pawn and then enabling this knight to now move somewhere. Probably I would end up going to e7 here. That attacks the bishop and kind of brings the knight closer to the center of the action, and would probably be a little more useful to me at that point. Instead, I go with queen d6. This directly attacks the bishop, so bishop moves, and then I play rook a to b8, defending the pawn here on b7 and trying to stabilize my position. So here, white moves the queen, eliminates this pin, because now if bishop takes, white can take back with the bishop, and the king is perfectly fine. This file is not opened. So I remaneuver the bishop here to g6. We have bishop takes, pawn takes, offering a rook trade on this file, which white does go for. And then white has the opportunity to pick up a free pawn here in the center. So now white's up a pawn, and the time is starting to get a little more critical. I believe at this point we're both under 5 minutes. And I realized that I needed to start speeding up, and so we started playing moves a little bit faster. So rook to e8, if knight takes the bishop, which probably is not a terrible move, then just rook takes, queen takes, and I have some back rank issues here because all three of the pawns in front of my king have not moved yet, which kind of forces me to play maybe not h5, but maybe h6. And just give my king a little bit of breathing room so the queen will not jump down and attack me any further. So instead we have a retreating move by white. Here white really does have the initiative against me, and I'm actually not doing so well in this game because of this. And so with the knight retreating, this kind of gives me a moment to, well, white's attack is now not progressing forward, instead it's regressing, it's moving backwards. So I took the opportunity to take the rook, and here with knight takes, white ends up losing its advantage. And the reason for this isn't often very clear, but the reason for this is because if white had taken with the queen, white still has a tempo against me. In chess, a tempo is a very forcing move that's coming up soon that one side has to respond to. Or it could mean that one side has an initial advantage. They have the chance to move first. For example, at the start of a game, white moves first, black moves second. White starts off with a slight tempo of just being the first one to initiate anything, and always has that first move until the position becomes equalized at a later point. So all that to say, after the queen recaptures on e1, the immediate threat is queen e8 checkmate. My king is having a lot of back rank issues here, and this forces me to play something like h6. However, with knight takes, not only does this remove a minor piece from the center of the board, it used to be covering these three squares here in the center. Now this piece is a full move backwards, back where it started. So this gives me a chance to start asking some questions, and especially now as our time is getting closer to about 2 minutes apiece, it's going to be very easy for a lot of these pawns that are loose to start falling very quickly. So queen moves to f4, immediately attacking this pawn here. Black is now attacking these two pawns. So I pick up the pawn here on c3. We have king f1. King f1. The idea here is now that I have captured right here, the next thing that can be attacked is the knight. So if white just went ahead and got tunnel vision and takes the pawn here on c7, that leaves me to be able to take the knight with a check, forcing white to respond and cannot play checkmate here, then giving me the chance to play h6, and now my king is perfectly safe. And sure, white might just pick up a pawn, pick up one of these pawns. However, I will be able to pick up pawns as well, and it's going to be very difficult to defend against all of these attackers. So going back, king f1, the knight is under attack. Queen a5, starting to play some faster moves, just quickly attacking that pawn, trying to cause some problems. Also defending the pawn here on c7, so queen takes is no longer an issue. Queen d4, attacking the a7 pawn. It's defended, so I'm not too worried about this. The primary threat right here is not really the pawn. The primary threat is queen d8 checkmate. Again, my king is having back rank issues. So at this point, I finally play h6, eliminating any back rank checkmate possibilities. And from here, we play fairly quickly. I start checking the white king, start targeting some of the pawns. And as we progress here, we have queen to e7, pins the knight to the king. With f4, defends the knight. However, all I need to play is the next move, which is f6, attacks the knight. The knight cannot move away because otherwise the king would be attacked. And so here we have a slightly delaying move with f5, kicks the bishop back. King gets out of the pin, but unfortunately it's too late, and we pick up a piece. And then from here, there's a number of checks that continue, and white in this position ended up running out of time. And this concludes the very first game. So this winner here is the first giveaway winner of the current 2023 Christmas giveaway. The next winners will also be for the current 2023 giveaway as well. So here I was given the white pieces for this game, and we're playing against Scuba Steve 3141, rated 1650. So the game starts with e4, and we have, what is this? I think this is a French here. Yes, French defense exchange variation. And here I had the option of playing for e5, which I believe is a little more of a common line for this kind of a position. However, I'm not super involved with openings, and I don't want to get too deep into theory and get myself in a hot water. So what I ended up doing was just taking on d5 and creating a symmetrical position, and then just developing pieces as normal. So here I've Vinkettoed my bishop and prepared to castle. Black is developing some pieces, castles, queen to d3 here in the center, and then rook to e8. So again, we see the rooks coming to the center of the board is just a very standard developmental move. Here we have bishop to e3, bringing out the bishop. Knight attacks on b4. It wasn't too concerning. It's attacking the knight, or sorry, the knight is attacking the pawn. The knight is also attacking the queen. Just bringing back the queen is the simplest thing to do here. And then on the next move, kicking out the knight. Throwing me off. Interesting. So knight to c6. Here we had an opportunity to win a pawn, is what it's saying. So let's see. Okay, knight to e5 targets the queen, targets the bishop. And let's see what the moves are for this. Queen to e6, still defending the bishop from the knight. Knight takes, queen takes, and then a3. Knight retreats, knight takes pawn, takes, and then finally a free pawn. Incredibly complicated. I saw none of that, so I just overlooked this very long continuation. Although it does work, instead I just played a more simple move, a3, and kicked back the knight. Rook here to the center, and again, the engine is saying, bring the knight into the center, attack these two pieces, and get some work done. So here we have a bishop trade is offered. Whoops. And here we have takes, takes, and then bishop to d6. So we have an option for a trade. Instead of trading, I went to g5, attacking this, and also offering a rook trade. I realized the bishop was right here, but the rook trade is always still an option. So queen f5, and then takes, takes, and then here I was able to pick up that pawn here in the center. Just in a little bit of a different way than the engine was suggesting earlier. So the queen moves to f5, targeting my knight here. Also keeping an eye on this knight. I can never drop back my king without just losing a knight like this. So for this reason, we have the knights under attack. I just bring the knight back. Adds a tempo on the queen by attacking the queen after I had moved. And from this point, I now have the opportunity to start opening up the queen side and making some progress attacking these two pieces, these two minor pieces of black's. So the bishop retreats. I advance the pawn into the center. We have a trade, and then a discovered attack launched onto the queen. In this moment, I was thinking for a while on which is the optimal square to move my knight to. In the end, I decided I was thinking too long, and I decided to just make a move. And that, unfortunately, was the worst thing I could have done, because I ended up hanging the b2 pawn for no particular reason. With rook b1, my idea was to hopefully win a pawn here and start targeting things that are around in this position. So the queen retreats. I picked up a pawn, and it gets a little bit complicated here as I'm looking. I want to push the pawn, however there's sufficient defenders to stop it and only a queen that's supporting the piece. So I opt for rook to e1. The idea here is to put pressure on this piece and potentially sacrifice, if necessary, in the long term. Bishop to c5, and then I traded off the rooks. The idea here was to pick up the pawn, but just before I took this, I realized that the bishop was in fact guarding this. So instead, I just trade the pawns here and unfortunately walk right into this tactic that I did not see. And it was a bad surprise to see this coming. Fortunately, I did have one response that I could play, the only move that saves my position here from just losing the rook after the king moves, and that it was queen to d5. So had this not happened, this game would clearly have been a pretty easy win here for black. So after the queen trade, I now have a pawn that's very quickly advancing towards the promotion square. So this becomes my focus as we progress. Black finds a very nice move, rook to e2, targeting this pawn on f2 with both the rook and the bishop. At the same time, the rook is also attacking my knight. So I save the knight by moving it to the corner. However, this doesn't exactly work with the pawn being dropped. And then the correct move here, the engine is saying this is very bad for black, or sorry, very bad for white. I think the idea here is that, let's just say this, and then this, we do have a pin. Oh no. What do we have? Oh, that's true. I can take this. So, taking the bishop, defends the rook, and protects me from the pin. There's obviously some troubles here with the knight being trapped in the corner and only having two squares it can move to. And black has the opportunity to make something of this, especially with just 2 minutes left on the clock for both players. Things can get dicey pretty quickly. So if we go back, king to h3, and then rook a rook a2, and then knight b3. Black here brings back the bishop and allows me to start pushing the pawn. Here black picks up the pawn, allows me to get another square closer to promotion, and here allowed an excellent tactical idea that actually works out pretty nicely. So originally my idea was to promote, bishop takes, and then I can pick up the rook. However, this does leave me in an endgame where black still has 4 pawns. Probably the a7 pawn is going to drop off very quickly, and they also have a bishop. and that's against my rook and my knight. And this would lead to a fairly long endgame, and there's a better option here. And so I ended up going for that. Removing the defender here of the promotion square, and also defends the knight, for if the rook takes, then rook takes rook, and white is very easily winning this position. So after rook takes bishop, this leaves only one option, and that is to recapture. You can recapture either way. I'm not quite sure that matters a whole lot. And then the pawn does promote. And then from here, we shuffle around pieces. Time is pretty low, and I was able to find this final tactic that essentially ended the game with black having no more pieces besides just pawns and a king. The endgame here was fairly simple to clean up. So delivered a few checks and then checkmated here in the corner to end up winning game number 2. So that brings us to game number 3. Game number 3 was against the user Benus. Benus rated 876, and I was given the black pieces for this game. So queen's pawn opening pieces are being developed. Here we had a bit of a London system. This is the idea here with bringing out the bishop after the queen moves, or sorry, the queen pawn moves. And I believe for the Londons to be continued, you would need to play bishop f5. And this is a setup-based opening, and I was aware of this potentially being played against me. And in order to get a game that was a little more imbalanced, I decided to go with knight to c6, and to not immediately mirror the position. Of course, I did that just a few moves later, and then moved the knight instead of pushing the pawn. So all in all, what I'm trying to do in this game is to keep it a little bit more interesting, and hopefully not walk into a setup-based position where the game will be equal for a very long time. So the knight hops out here, attacking my bishop. This is not too much of a concern for me, because after I recapture, I gain an open file. This open file can be used for a variety of different things, and I plan on using this in the future in some way to help out my position. So we both develop our bishops. White retreats the bishop here, which allows me the chance to capture. The reason for this is because normally in a London-based position, you can, and generally this is a good idea, to bring the bishop back to g3. And after bishop takes, you can take with the rook pawn, because generally there's still a pawn right here on h7. However, in this position, that doesn't work because rook can take the other rook, and we have check, king moves, and the queen falls. So obviously it doesn't work. Instead, white takes the other direction and takes with the kingside pawn. So I developed my queen here. The idea is to start targeting these two pawns. We have the rook and we have the queen that are beginning to gang up, and this knight can potentially start moving, working its way up into the white position and potentially causing some issues. Queen f3, a very defensive move, defending this pawn, defending this pawn, defending this pawn, and putting pressure onto the f6 knight. Now, in coming up very, very soon, I did end up overlooking something that began right here with g4. So I played knight to b4. This attacks the bishop, and this attacks the pawn. The pawn is defended, so the idea I had here was just to take the bishop, check the king, and begin a pawn push potentially right here. It's a little risky by leaving my king in the center, but this was an idea that potentially I could use at some point. So here I go ahead and I pick up the pawn. When g4 is moved, this now reveals the queen's sight on the h2 pawn. So I was able to pick up the pawn here, trade it off this piece first, so there's nothing to worry about later on, and then I take the rook. However, white has one very good response here that kind of puts me into a weird position and is pretty uncomfortable. So white castles, black castles, and the killer move here for white was g5. g5 for me is a problem because now that I've castled my king over to c8, there's nobody defending the f7 pawn anymore. So as soon as my knight moves, let's say h7, queen takes on f7, This pawn is hanging with check to my king. This pawn is hanging. This pawn is hanging. And white has suddenly just entirely infiltrated my position. So this is what happened. I took the pawn here on g5. By taking the pawn here, I was able to defend the e6 pawn. This prevents any checks to my king and stabilizes my center position a little bit more, because if I do end up losing e6, I think I'm in a lot of trouble here, having only one pawn in the center to my opponent's 3. So queen takes on g2, taking a pawn and also defending the knight. This does let g7 fall, and again, I'm still in a bit of a tangled up position because my knight cannot move anywhere. Both of these squares are defended by the queen. The queen can capture both. And if I were to play something like knight to h3, well, now my queen hangs. Same thing if I bring my knight over here, the queen is still hanging, and this is just very bad. So what I begin to do here is work my queen away and get myself out of this pin. And then white finds rook to f8. Rook to f8 was a very concerning move for me. And what I was concerned about was after this, and bringing the king here, that the white queen can now begin to check my king uncontrollably, and I can get into a lot of trouble. This queen is targeting absolutely everything and is threatening all kinds of squares here. And I was concerned that my king might get checked out into the open, and my king would start running this way and start getting himself into a lot of trouble, with the knight possibly hopping in and the pawns storming forward. However, I ended up going for it, and my whole thought process here was, I just hope that there's nothing that white is going to be able to do here. I think I have some escape squares. I think I can move like this, perhaps push a pawn and tuck my king away into the corner. And so I'm going to just bank on the fact that that is available. With our time now sitting at 1 minute for white and 2 minutes for black, I was hoping that if I just start moving a little bit faster, I hopefully will survive this. And so that's exactly what happened. Instead of the checks, white goes over here with b4, targeting the b7 pawn. I defend the pawn by pushing it forwards, and then white is able to find a very nice move that I had missed, which does pick up a pawn. The king moves, and then the pawn is captured. At this point, I just start retreating my queen back, bringing my queen a little bit closer to my king to help defend things. And as time starts dipping down, we start moving a little bit faster. I deliver some checks, and we begin maneuvering our pieces around a little bit. I do get a chance to pick up a pawn here and start targeting a variety of different things. And it's in this position that white runs out of time, and that is the end of game number 3. So let's work our way on towards the chess master game. If you're still watching at this point, thank you so much. Be sure to leave a like on the video and consider subscribing if you'd like to see more of these games that I'm playing against the winners of the giveaway. Also, I will be doing another giveaway coming up in April, so be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so that you're notified when that giveaway begins, so you don't miss it and you can have a chance to win a prize and play a game against me. So that would also include you in the next video, so I think that might be kind of fun. Anyway, let's move on to the next game. We have had a variety of different opponents, and as we're working our way towards that chess master, we first have to play against Dster, rated 1916 from Spain. So now we're dealing with an opponent who's actually outranks me here. The ratings are very close. Here I'm sitting at 1907 when I was playing this game, and my opponent was sitting at 1916. So let's see how this game goes. Starts off with a Caro-Kann. If you know anything about me, if you've seen any of my videos, you probably know that the Caro-Kann is one of my more favorite openings, and I tend to play it a lot against e4 as black. Or, yes, correct. White plays e4, I play the Caro-Kann against that. That's often my response, but sometimes you'll see me playing some other things if I just want to change things up. But in this game, we have the Caro-Kann played against me. And so we have some fairly simple Caro-Kann ideas. There's pressure here in the center. The knight is pinned now, so it's no longer defending these pawns. I opt for a counter pin, so now neither of our knights are truly defending anything in the center or attacking anything in the center. I castle, he develops some more pieces. I go bishop e3, we have knight f5. I trade off the pieces there and then attack the bishop here on g4. So black does take. The other option here is just to retreat the bishop. However, in this case, if you do retreat the bishop, then you kind of walk into this, but black can get away by taking the bishop here first and threatening the queen and the rook, and can kind of get a tempo and get out of this situation. But in order to avoid all of this, my opponent decides to instead just trade off the bishop and then move on with the game from there. So I develop my final minor piece and then play a3. The idea is to prevent the bishop from hopping into b4 and then also opening the door for b4 to be played. And then the c5 square would be very well controlled by both of the pawns that now are there. Queen to b6, then we see b4 arrive. And then here is where I begin to get into a bit of trouble. So we have f6, knight to a4, queen moves back, knight hops into the center, threatening this fork right here on both the queen and on the rook. However, after bishop takes this knight, pawn takes, I end up losing a pawn. So takes, if pawn takes again, then queen recaptures, and I'm just down a pawn, and my center is really pretty much toast. So things are not looking too great for me here. Instead, I maneuver for this position with the idea that after takes, bishop takes, and if for whatever reason the knight decides to move and doesn't trade here, we actually do have an interesting position. So if we go here, this is obviously checkmate in one. So creating little threats to hopefully get my opponent to think a little bit and give the chance for my opponent to potentially make a mistake. So we do have takes. However, instead of the knight capturing the bishop or the knight moving away and accidentally blundering checkmate, my opponent plays e5. e5, kicking out the bishop. And I realized after that this is actually a very good move. What black is doing here is they're taking advantage of the fact that they have 3 pawns in the center. I have 1. And this pawn is very, very loosely held. It's essentially just a liability for me. I can't really defend it against moves like queen a5 or queen e7. All of these moves are attacking this pawn, and with this bishop moving away, the knight could trade, and I have nothing left to defend against this. I can bring a rook over, sure, but this pawn is most likely going to be falling pretty soon. Black has a massive center, and the idea is very simple at this point. Black supports the pawn push by putting a queen behind, and now all of these pawns are just going to start storming my position. Black does win the pawn here. I bring my queen back into the action and then bring my rook over here to target the queen. We have the queen shuffles over, queen trade, and then bishop to c3. So things are not going very well for me here. I've lost my pawn, and we have 3 connected pawns, 2 of which are passed pawns, which means there's no other pawns that are in the way of those that could potentially stop it. Here, this isn't exactly a passed pawn, because once the pawn moves forward, there's the option I could take to just trade it with my pawn. It still leaves me with 2 pawns in the center, and black, as you can see by the eval bar, is entirely winning in this position. So both of us are getting lower on time. We trade rooks. I try to plant my bishop here on b4. However, a5 is a very nice move that I had somehow overlooked that now forces my bishop to move somewhere. The idea with putting the bishop here on b4, I don't know if I've mentioned this, is to try to slow down one of these passed pawns. I have a rook and I have a bishop that both are guarding the square, and black only has a single rook. And with this bishop now being moved, I now don't have a good way to stop this. Black finds a very nice move. This forks the rook and it forks the bishop. So traded pieces, and now black is entirely in the driver's seat. As you can see, I have 50 seconds My opponent has a minute and a half, and the pawns just start rolling forwards. So at this point, I decided, okay, I'm clearly losing here. These pawns are rolling. The king is moving in very quickly, and he's going to help support all these pawns pushing forwards. The rook is right here. This is bad. So I'm just going to move fast, and I'm going to see what happens. So we have trades. I bring my rook up here, trying to stop black and hopefully get black to think a little bit, trying to defend their pawns. Here we have this move. It doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. However, the idea is that once I push this pawn with the idea of bringing my king over here, I don't need to defend my pawn anymore. I can ideally get my king in front of these pawns and at least stop these two. It's not a long-term fix. It's more like a band-aid, if anything, because let's just play some moves. I don't know, something like this. The rook is going to attack these pawns. I just kind of have to wait around. And even if I do end up winning these pawns here, get both of these central pawns, I now have a new problem of these two pawns are now passed pawns. They're going to run forward, they're going to promote, and that's just going to be game over. There's nothing I can do. However, I thought, let's try. We're going to move fast, and we're going to try to get these pawns out of the way and start pushing my pawns. So let's go back to the position. Rook b5, starting to shuffle my rook around, bringing my king into the position. We have a check to defend the rook. The rook is now, once it moves, it's defended by the pawn. I bring the king up, and I'm just keeping my king close. This pawn wants to promote, and if I let this rook cut me off, the pawn promotes, and that's obviously quite bad. Queen and a rook versus a king, my king's not going to make it very long. So the next pawn moves up. Time is now getting very, very close, and so at this point, it's just a time scramble. I start checking the king, bring my rook back to b4 in order to cut off the king from getting any closer to my pawns. Rook to c1, and then I bring the rook here into the back to help defend against this promotion square. And in the middle of time pressure, black plays pawn to c2, and I am able to take the pawn on d2. So in this position, black ended up running out of time. It was a very close game. Black is still entirely winning this position, but with the time pressure, a lot of things can happen. And even though this was a very close game, white ends up the victor in this match. With that, we are now moving on to our final game of the video. This is against the chess master known on chess.com as Malevolent Tactics. So if we're looking at the rating right now, he's rated only 2016. However, when you go to his profile, you see that his rating is far higher. It just has dropped down for a little bit due to a series of tough tournaments and maybe a losing streak or two. But there's no doubt about it, this player is a master level player. And so with that known, I go into this game ready to fight for everything I have. And we open with e4, e5. We have the knights developed, and we walk right into a 4 knights. This is an opening I'm a little more familiar with, and this feels fairly comfortable because I'm glad that against a very strong player, I see an opening that I'm familiar with. So even if I'm outrated by far, even if I'm not the best chess player in this match, I still have some idea of what's going on here in the opening. So it's very much like a copycat opening here. We both Vienketto our bishops into the corner, and we have all of our knights developed in the center, matching pawns here. The only thing I'm missing is just d6, but I castle first, then I play d6, and in this position, we have an entirely symmetrical position. Everything is exactly the same, right up until here. So white plays h3. I play bishop d7, even though h6 is probably a better move here, giving my king a little bit more breathing room and helping to defend all of these squares in front of my king. The trouble that I ran into here was that I was not at all expecting what white was just about to do. The king hops up. I say, okay, seems a little interesting. I'll hop my knight into the center. This turns out to be quite a bad idea because this pawn is now very difficult to defend. I do defend it here with c5, trying to defend against the knight. However, what comes next, without a pawn here, I have no way of contesting the f4 square. And the chess master immediately jumps on that and begins battering my position. What we have here is a wall of 4 pawns. All 4 of them are storming towards my king, and I don't really have a good way to defend against this. As we'll see, I bring my rook here to b8, trying to defend this pawn with the anticipation of e5 coming, and the bishop now eyeing up my pawn over here. Things are not going so well for me. So with that pawn defended, the pawns start marching, and they come quick. The knight hops in, the bishop hops in, the queen starts working her way over into the position here. I try to stabilize, bring a rook here, defend my pawn in the center, and as soon as I move the bishop, probably to c6 here, hoping to either target the pawn here on e4, or contest the bishop long term over here by the king. That was the idea. However, we have a potential bishop trade. I take the chance to move my rook, we trade bishops, and the pawns keep rolling. Pawn to g5, my knight's under attack, but there's not a good place to move it. If I go here, it dies to the pawn. I can't go to either of these squares because I have my own pieces covering it. Right here, there's a pawn that's blocking my own piece. I could move to g8, I could move to h5, but h5, pawns get traded, as in this. And if something like king to g6, I'm in a whole lot of trouble because this queen is right here, and this queen is going to hop in and do some damage very, very quickly. So I opt against that, and I go knight to g8, trying to slow things down. The pawns keep coming. I can't move anywhere except for f8 and h8. f8 probably here is a better move. My concern was that something like this was going to happen, just making some random moves, and that my king might get checkmated here with the pawn now covering both of the escape squares and my king being entirely boxed in by my own pieces. Of course, in this position, we have just knight takes queen that defends. However, perhaps white plays something like just takes the pawn and then threatens checkmate like this. And looking at this now, Engine's just saying mate in 2, so there is no way to defend against this. And in order to avoid that, I decided to stick my king into the corner of the board and move on like this. The queen hops in, I bring my rook here, giving a little bit of breathing room around my king and targeting the pawn on g5, additionally stopping the pawn here. It is a good move, but unfortunately it is a little bit too late. Too little, too late. The pawns keep storming my king side, pawns trade, and at this point the pawn on f7 is entirely unstoppable. It's attacking my knight. Once my knight moves out of the attack, if I were to play knight to e7 here, the pawn promotes with check, and because I can't go anywhere, I could block with a knight, but now my opponent's got 2 queens, I'd have to trade and then block like this, and I've now lost a rook for the cost of a pawn that just promoted. Entirely bad for me. So in this position, I bring my rook here to e7, try to target this, also offering a queen trade on this diagonal. Once the rook moved away, the queens can see one another now, and white goes ahead and takes the trade, captures the pawn here in the center, bishop takes, and here I realized I had made another fatal error. My idea here was that after bishop takes, rook takes, pawn takes, king takes, and at least here I have more control over this square because my king can now see these 2 squares. Unfortunately, this did not quite work out. Let's see. So after this, we have knight to e7, pawn does promote, check, king tries to escape, the other rook hops right in, and from this point, I'm able to pick up a free bishop, but it's, again, not enough to really do a whole lot. So when the rook came in to f1, the bishop is hanging, granted, but once the rooks trade, I still have a single knight versus a rook and another knight. There's not much I can do at this point. So I continue playing. I go with knight to d5, attacking the rook and defending my pawn. Yeah, here I believe I should have taken the rook. However, I didn't see that. I didn't end up playing it. And we start trading off some pawns. White gives some checks, wins some more pawns, and the endgame just kind of progresses with more checks, pawns falling here and there, a little bit of maneuvering. I got the rook, but still it's too little too late, as the knight is just entirely unstoppable, and the pawns are going to be running. We have passed pawns. Sorry, only one passed pawn here. And we have this pawn here, which is probably not too hard to stop. Let's, for move's sake, let's see, we could go like this. And then the knight hops here, takes the pawn on the next move. And then this pawn is just going to start running towards promotion square. So, not winnable, even though picking up the rook was a nice thing here. But there was not much to be done. So we continue playing on. I capture the g7 pawn, but white is able to get my final pawn. And at this point, these pawns are rolling. There's nothing to do. And so we continue playing on for several more moves. And in this position, I'm checked. I can't do a whole lot, but what I can do is block the pawn. And here, I got very, very lucky. In this position, white has many moves that are winning. So many. We have knight to c4. We have knight to a4. All of these moves allow this pawn to just keep running forwards, and my king is going to bounce between these two. For example, this, my only move is here. Actually, due to just opposition, the king can play king to c7, supports the promotion of the square here, and then it's probably just going to be a king and queen checkmate against me. But another option, just looking at how many options the chess master here has to beat me, they could just run the pawn and promote like this. And then they could promote another pawn and have two queens if they want. There is a lot of room for just whatever they want to do. However, in this position, white plays the only move that doesn't win. Knight to d5 and stalemates my king. So this game somehow ends in a draw. Completely wild game, tons of fun to play, but again, I was entirely losing the game. This was funny, but again, I was entirely losing the entire game, entirely outmatched, but it was a lot of fun. And that concludes this video with all of the games played against all 5, I believe, of all of these different giveaway winners. I will be playing some more games against additional giveaway winners, because there were 15 winners for this giveaway. Not all of them were interested in playing the game. Some of them were, and those games will be coming up very, very soon in the next week or two. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. I can upload the analysis of those future games at some point. If you guys are interested in that, leave a comment down below if you are. But otherwise, that's going to wrap it up for today's video. I hope all of you have a fantastic New Year's and enjoy 2024 as it rolls up upon all of us. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. See ya!